Welcome to Launch Window Research, where we cover everything you need to know about investing in the space industry. My name is Nathan Evans, and we have a lot to cover today. The primary focus of this video will be on Virgin Galactic, namely, is their VSS spacecraft safe? So, a few weeks ago, I put out a video expressing my concerns about the safety of the VSS system. Primarily, I was worried about the system's lack of redundancy and ambitiously low ticket price, which is not the ideal combination if you want to scale up while also maintaining a high safety standard. But in that video, I didn't really dive into the technology that much because I didn't have much to say. But since then, I have finished reading George Sutton's Rocket Propulsion Elements, and this book has an entire chapter on hybrid rocket engines, so I have a bit more to share about the technology, which will be the main focus of this video. Of course, we also have a bit of space news to catch you up on, primarily coming from AST SpaceMobile, which has been on a massive run-up over the past few weeks. We have all of that and more to cover in this video, so let's go. So here is the rundown of space stocks last week. We had a pretty red week with Astra rapidly approaching the $1 mark and Rocket Lab and Redwire losing a lot of the gains they experienced last week. Our top stock was AST SpaceMobile, and this stock has been on an absolute rampage over the past few weeks. This is likely due to the upcoming launch of their test satellite Blue Walker 3. But it is worth noting that the upcoming launch of Blue Walker 3 seems to be the only really positive news coming out of AST Mobile as of late. They have recently announced that their first batch of commercial satellites will be coming 6 months later than anticipated and will also be a good bit smaller. So the initial commercially operational Bluebird satellites will be of a similar size to the test satellite Blue Walker 3. So if you are holding AST SpaceMobile, I do want you to be well aware of the apparent rift between the actual fundamental news coming out of the company and the direction of the stock price. It seems like a lot of people are hyped for the upcoming launch of Blue Walker 3, and we've seen what hype does to space stocks. As soon as the launch is over, even if it's successful, we see a lot of that money dissipate very quickly. So that is something to consider if you are investing in AST SpaceMobile. A lot of these recent gains are probably not permanent. Additionally, it does appear that AST might have to raise more capital before deploying the entirety of their 20 equatorial satellites. But moving on to other news, Virgin Orbit has lowered their launch forecast from 6 flights per year to just 4. And this is a trend that we're seeing in the space industry. A lot of small launchers have overestimated the demand for satellites. Personally, I think that this trend is part of a larger feature of the space industry, which is the fact that everybody is interested in building rockets, but relatively few people are interested in building the things that get launched on those rockets. And I get it, rockets are really cool, but do keep that in mind for your investments. A lot of the time, where the money is not necessarily where all the excitement is. Moving on, we had Redwire Space announce that they would produce the first commercially owned in-space greenhouse. Of course, Redwire already does have some space botany experience helping NASA grow plants on the ISS in the past. But nonetheless, this is very exciting news, and hopefully we can see more of this from private companies in the future. But with that, our last piece of space news before diving into Virgin Galactic and the VSS spacecraft comes from D-Orbit, a space logistics company that recently canceled their plans to go public via SPAC. They originally announced this deal back in January, but now they're saying that the markets have trended in an unfavorable direction, and I can't necessarily disagree with them. The vast majority of space SPACs are trading well below the prices that they IPO'd at. In my opinion, I do see this trend continuing with other space companies like Voyager or Relativity, who might be big enough to go IPO at this point, but might wait until we get the next bull market, regardless of how the company itself is doing. But with that, we can begin talking about Virgin Galactic and their VSS spacecraft. But if you're enjoying the video so far, consider leaving a like and subscribing. We're gonna keep posting videos like this every week to keep you informed on the space industry, so you won't want to miss them. So the VSS spacecraft runs on a hybrid rocket motor. A hybrid motor is a mix between a solid rocket motor and a liquid rocket engine. A solid motor has the fuel and oxidizer mixed together in a solid form. that once ignited cannot be stopped. This is a very cheap and simple solution, but again, not that ideal because if things go awry, you can't exactly pull the plug. A liquid engine has the fuel and oxidizer stored separately, which then mix in a combustion chamber and produce thrust. This is generally a whole lot more controllable, but can have many moving parts depending on the complexity of the engine and be quite expensive. A hybrid motor combines the best of both worlds, having a solid fuel but then a liquid oxidizer. So it has the simplicity and few moving parts of a solid motor, but if things go wrong, you can always cut off the flow of oxidizer and the engine will stop. So you get the simplicity and cost effectiveness of a solid motor, but the controllability and safety of a liquid one. So with that information, the hybrid motor sounds like the perfect selection for the VSS spacecraft, although there are a few more nuances that I want to touch on. The first is the problem hybrid motors have with combustion instability. Combustion instability occurs when fuel burning is not constant and it can produce a bunch of vibrations which aren't necessarily good for spacecraft. Hybrid rocket motors are susceptible to a very low frequency form of instability called chugging. You can see it pretty clearly on this graph right here, and if left unchecked, it can shake your spacecraft apart. However, I'm not particularly concerned about chugging because this is generally something that is ironed out or engineered for in the very early development stages of any spacecraft. So as long as the Virgin Galactic team was decently competent enough to engineer their spacecraft to withstand these forms of vibrations or to minimize them, then it's not really an issue. So going back to the question of is the VSS spacecraft safe? Well, at least in this regard, I would say yes. But there is one more thing I learned about while reading this chapter, and it does sort of potentially throw a wrench in the Virgin Galactic business model. When you fill up a solid rocket motor with propellant, you don't fill up the entire thing indiscriminately. You have to leave various holes so that the fuel can flow through. These holes have to be carefully engineered to make sure that A, most of the propellant burns, and B, that it all burns at a relatively constant rate. The burning rate is roughly proportional to the amount of surface area of the solid propellant exposed at any given time, so you want the surface area to remain relatively constant, and it also has to be quite high, especially in hybrid rocket motors. So here is a graph of such combustion ports inside a hybrid rocket motor. As you can see, there is a large amount of surface area exposed, and most of the chamber is pretty much empty. But what I want to direct your attention to are these little pieces in the corners and between the ports that do not burn at all. These are called slivers, and there's a good portion of them left in any solid or hybrid rocket motor after operation. These pieces of unburned fuel, combined with the overall complex structure that the fuel is laid out in, does not necessarily bode well for VSS's prospects of being rapidly reused. I know this isn't a perfect one-to-one comparison, but imagine how much slower the airline industry would be if after every flight the airport crew had to scrape out old fuel from the tank and replace it with a meticulously casted new fuel deposit. It's really not that hard to imagine that being less than ideal. Personally, I think a better fit for the VSS spacecraft would have been a pressure-fed liquid rocket engine. Pressure-fed liquid engines are similarly simplistic to hybrid rocket engines, but they do not suffer from this refueling problem. Of course, there are limits to how far a pressure-fed engine will take you, but considering the relatively easy flight path of the VSS spacecraft, I think it is perfectly reasonable. So, don't get me wrong, the VSS spacecraft is brilliantly designed to make occasional trips to the edge of space and back. I would just personally do a few things differently if I were scaling the VSS spacecraft up to the scale of a multi-billion-dollar company, which is what Virgin Galactic hopes to be. But that's my assessment. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments. I want to let you know that I personally am still not investing in Virgin Galactic. I'm skeptical of their model, but I am not shorting them, and I am not pressuring you to sell if you are personally a holder. Do whatever you would like. But again, if you liked the video, consider subscribing, and we also have a Slack channel where you can get more involved with the community. Also, if you are able to support us on Patreon, that would be greatly appreciated. Take care, and I hope to see you next week. Bye.